They thought they had brought home a monster, a creature too big, too scarred, and far too silent to be trusted. The children hid behind their grandmother's dress, neighbors whispered warnings over fences, and even Martha, Robert's wife, wondered if her husband had made a terrible mistake. Yet Robert saw something different behind the dog's amber eyes, something no one else cared to notice. This wasn't just an animal cast aside by fear and rumor. This was a story waiting to unfold, one that would prove the line between terror and protection was thinner than anyone believed. Robert Johnson was 55, still strong from years of labor, his face marked by a scar above his left eyebrow and the weight of a hard life. He had retired early, hoping for peace with his wife Martha in their quiet farmhouse. But Robert's heart ached for something more. A companion, perhaps a guardian. At the animal shelter, rows of barking dogs filled the air with noise. Then, in the last cage, he saw him. Massive, silent, black as midnight, scars etched across his body, eyes glowing amber. The staff whispered his name. The monster. Robert felt only resolve. The day Robert brought the dog home, silence spread across the yard. The children froze, their ball forgotten, as the towering figure stepped from the truck. Martha's breath caught in her chest, fear flashing in her eyes. Neighbors leaned against their fences, shaking their heads, muttering warnings. The dog didn't bark, didn't wag his tail. He simply stood, tall and scarred, muscles taut beneath his black coat, amber eyes fixed forward. Robert rested his hand firmly on the dog's back and said, "His name is Shadow." For the first time, the monster's head dipped low, calm and strangely obedient. Shadow was unlike any dog the Johnson family had ever seen. He did not play, nor bark at strangers, nor chase after the children's toys. Instead, he followed Robert with silent devotion, moving with an eerie stillness that unsettled the household. At night, when the family slept, Shadow planted himself on the porch, eyes glowing faintly like embers in the dark. Martha whispered uneasily, "It doesn't rest, it only watches." Robert defended him, though even he sometimes wondered what haunted the beast. The neighbors kept warning, "That monster will turn one day." Yet Shadow never wavered from his watch. One stormy afternoon, trouble struck. The grandchildren's laughter suddenly vanished, replaced by silence. Their ball had rolled into the woods, and they had wandered too far. Panic seized Martha as she realized they were gone. Robert rushed into the forest, calling desperately. From the shadows came a blur of black fur, Shadow. He wasn't chasing the children but shielding them, body low and teeth bared toward the unseen darkness behind. The children clung to each other, terrified but unharmed. Robert pulled them close, his heart pounding. The supposed monster had not attacked. He had protected what mattered most. From that day forward, fear began to soften. The children no longer whispered monster, but quietly said his new name, Shadow. At night, the giant Labrador lay across their doorway like a sentry, amber eyes glowing in the dim light. Robert often found himself awake, sitting beside the dog, his hand resting on the scarred black fur. "What battles did you fight before you found us?" he murmured. Shadow gave no answer, only a calm, steady gaze that spoke louder than words. Martha, watching from the hallway, felt her fear slip into something new. Reluctant, cautious gratitude. Life with Shadow settled into an uneasy rhythm. Robert drank his morning coffee in the kitchen while the great dog lay silently at his feet, scars catching the sunlight. Martha cooked, casting nervous glances toward the animal, her hands never truly steady. "He doesn't act like a pet," she whispered. "He acts like he's waiting for something." Robert only nodded, though the thought had crossed his mind too. Shadow was never playful, never needy. He was patient, ever alert, as if guarding a secret only he understood. And slowly, Robert began to wonder if fate had led him here. One sunny afternoon, Robert tossed a ball for the grandchildren. Their laughter filled the yard, though their eyes still darted nervously toward Shadow. The ball rolled across the grass, stopping at the dog's paws. For a moment, silence hung heavy. Shadow lowered his head, sniffed it once, and nudged it gently back with his nose. The children gasped, then giggled nervously. Martha stood on the porch, arms folded, her expression torn between relief and caution. Robert smiled faintly. It wasn't much, but it was something. A gesture that hinted the beast might be more than fear, perhaps even friend. Not everyone shared Robert's faith. One neighbor leaned on the fence, shaking his head. "That animal will turn, mark my words," he muttered. Robert stood tall, Shadow at his side, silent as stone. The dog's amber eyes fixed on the man, unblinking. A shiver ran down the neighbor's spine, though Robert felt only pride. He rested a firm hand on Shadow's back. "He protects what's his," Robert replied. As the neighbor walked away, Martha whispered, "What if they're right?" Robert squeezed her hand gently. "Then let me be wrong, but I believe in him." Shadow stood watch, unyielding. Evenings grew quiet with Shadow on the porch. Robert often sat beside him, rocking slowly in his chair, the wooden floor creaking beneath the weight of his thoughts. Martha peeked through the screen door, her worry softening bit by bit. Shadow never asked for affection, never sought attention. He simply kept his place, eyes scanning the yard as if it belonged solely to him. Robert, gazing at the scarred head resting on massive paws, whispered, "You've carried burdens, haven't you, old boy?" The dog lifted his eyes to meet his master's. No words, but enough understanding passed between them. One morning, Robert found tracks near the edge of his field. Kneeling in the grass, he studied the deep impressions, claw marks too large for stray dogs. Shadow sniffed the earth, body rigid, ears forward. Martha stood by the fence, holding her shawl tight. "Coyotes?" she asked. Robert shook his head, unease growing in his gut. "Bigger." Shadow growled low, the sound rumbling like distant thunder. The children were kept inside that day, while Robert worked along the fence line, Shadow never leaving his side. Whatever threat lurked beyond the trees, Robert knew the beast was ready for it. The barn smelled of hay and old wood as Robert pushed the heavy door open. Sunlight cut through gaps in the planks, dust swirling like tiny ghosts. Shadow padded in behind him, silent as always, nose twitching at scents too faint for human senses. Robert lit a lantern, scanning the corners where tools leaned and crates lay stacked. The dog stiffened suddenly, ears perked, body tense. "What is it, boy?" Robert whispered. A rustle came from the shadows, quick and sharp. Shadow moved closer, placing himself between Robert and the sound, his amber eyes locked on the darkness ahead. At the far edge of the field, Robert found the wooden fence broken, splintered as though struck with great force. He crouched, running his calloused fingers along the jagged edge. Shadow stood beside him, body tense, muscles rigid. The dog's nose flared, catching a scent that made him growl low. Martha hurried over, worry etched across her face. "What could have done this?" she asked. Robert shook his head slowly. "Not coyotes." He glanced toward the tree line, uneasy. Shadow pressed forward, tail stiff, eyes locked on the woods. Whatever lurked beyond, the dog was already prepared to confront it. The forest was thick with silence as Robert walked with Shadow leading the way. Shafts of sunlight pierced through the canopy, painting the ground in streaks of gold and shadow. Robert held a walking stick, his eyes scanning every corner. Shadow moved ahead, sniffing the earth, ears flicking at the faintest sound. It wasn't long before Robert noticed signs, tracks, broken branches. Something large had passed here. "Stay sharp," he murmured. Shadow stopped, growled softly, and fixed his gaze on a dense thicket. Robert felt the hairs rise on his neck. Whatever hunted them had chosen the wrong family. That evening, the farmhouse glowed warmly, but unease lingered inside. Robert sat in his chair by the fireplace, the light flickering across his scarred face. Shadow lay on the floor at his side, head resting on massive paws, eyes still alert despite the calm. Martha stood in the doorway, arms crossed, studying them both. "He's not like other dogs," she whispered. Robert looked down at Shadow and nodded. No, he isn't. He's more. The children played quietly in the corner, casting glances at the dog. Slowly, trust was beginning to grow, but the shadow of fear never fully disappeared. One afternoon, Robert found himself at the farmhouse gate, facing two neighbours. Their arms were folded, suspicion heavy in their eyes. "That beast doesn't belong here," one said. Robert stood firm, shadow at his side, sitting tall and unflinching. The massive black Labrador's amber eyes fixed on the men, calm yet commanding. "He hasn't harmed a soul," Robert replied, his voice steady. The neighbours muttered, shaking their heads as they walked away. Robert rested his hand on Shadow's back, feeling the strength beneath the scars. "They don't know you," he whispered. Shadow pressed closer, silent but loyal. At the chicken coop behind the farmhouse, Robert knelt beside claw marks scratched deep into the dirt. His scarred hands traced the evidence, while unease tightened his chest. Shadow stood a few feet away, body stiff, ears pricked toward the forest. The big Labrador's amber eyes glowed in the sunlight, focused, unyielding. "Something's been here," Robert muttered. Martha's voice trembled from the doorway. "Coyotes?" He shook his head. "No. Bigger." The silence that followed was broken only by Shadow's low growl, a sound like distant thunder, warning of threats unseen but surely near. The sun was high as Robert chopped wood near the farmhouse. Sweat streaked his brow, his muscles straining with each swing. Shadow lay in the grass nearby, black coat gleaming, scars visible, ears flicking at every sound. Though the dog appeared to rest, his amber eyes missed nothing. A sudden snap of a twig from the woods drew his attention, head lifting, body tense in an instant. Robert paused, leaning on the axe, following Shadow's gaze. The world seemed too still for a moment. "What is it, boy?" Robert asked softly. Shadow growled, steady and low, prepared for whatever approached. Robert carried his old shotgun as he walked the edge of the forest. He wasn't hunting. He was preparing. Shadow padded silently at his side, collar glinting in the light, muscles tight beneath his black coat. The tracks they'd found days earlier haunted Robert's mind. He crouched, studying the ground, heart heavy with unease. Shadow suddenly froze, every muscle rigid, amber eyes locked on the shadows beyond the trees. A deep growl rumbled in his chest. Robert's finger tightened slightly on the gun. "We're not alone," he whispered. The monster people feared was no threat. He was their greatest shield. The barn was thick with dust and silence as Robert pried open a heavy crate. Sunlight streamed through the cracks in wooden planks, cutting beams across the floor. Shadow stood beside him, tail stiff, ears tuned to every creak. Inside the crate lay old farm tools, long forgotten. But a sudden rustle in the rafters made Robert freeze. Shadow surged forward, planting himself between Robert and the noise, body tense, amber eyes blazing. Robert exhaled, steadying his nerves. "Easy, boy," he whispered. Together, man and dog faced the unknown, bound by trust deeper than any fear. Dark clouds gathered over the farmhouse as Robert sprinted through the tall grass, breath heavy, silver watch glinting with each stride. Shadow ran beside him, powerful muscles propelling his scarred body forward, collar jangling with every bound. The grandchildren's frightened cries carried from the woods. Robert's chest tightened, fear and determination battling within him. Shadow surged ahead, disappearing into the trees. By the time Robert reached them, the great dog stood guard, body firm, amber eyes blazing at the forest line. The children clung to each other, untouched, safe behind the protector they once called a monster. The tension with the neighbours reached its peak. One morning, Robert found them at his gate, their faces twisted with anger. "That dog is dangerous," they accused, pointing at Shadow. The Labrador sat calmly at Robert's side, unmoving, his scars visible in the daylight. Robert's voice was firm, resolute. "He has done nothing but protect this family." The neighbours muttered, but the conviction in Robert's tone silenced them. As they walked away, Shadow pressed closer to his master. Robert whispered, They'll never understand, but I do. For once, Martha, watching from the porch, nodded quietly in agreement. The barn was dim and filled with dust as Robert dragged another old crate into the light. He coughed, wiping sweat from his brow. Shadow stood watch, his amber eyes fixed on the rafters above. Robert pried open the lid and froze. Inside lay letters, photographs, and relics from years gone by. Martha stepped in, her hand trembling as she picked up a faded picture of soldiers with a black dog almost identical to Shadow. "He's not a monster," she whispered. Robert looked down at the great Labrador, realization dawning. Shadow's past was written in scars and silent loyalty. A week later, the grandchildren ran laughing across the yard, their fear of Shadow slowly fading. But when a stray coyote darted toward them, snarling, the Labrador moved like lightning. He leapt between the children and the threat, body rigid, teeth bared in warning. The predator halted, then fled into the woods. The children clung to Robert, wide-eyed, while Shadow stood tall, unshaken. "He saved them," Martha whispered, her voice breaking. Tears welled in her eyes as she finally saw the truth. This was no monster. They had been blessed with a silent protector, fierce yet gentle. Golden sunlight bathed the farmhouse as peace returned. Robert knelt in the grass, his arm draped across Shadow's broad-scarred back. The children ran freely nearby, their laughter ringing through the yard. Martha stood on the porch, smiling warmly for the first time since Shadow arrived. The dog sat tall, amber eyes soft now, watching his family with quiet pride. Robert whispered, "You were never a monster. You were the guardian we didn't know we needed." Shadow pressed against him, calm and steady. In that moment, every fear, every doubt was replaced with gratitude for the protector they had found.